The helicopter blades thundered overhead as Lieutenant Dmitry Volkov squinted through the frosted window. Below, the endless expanse of Siberian taiga stretched in every direction, a frozen sea of skeletal pines and snowdrifts. The cold seeped through the metal hull of the Mi-8, biting even through his thick parka. "Welcome to paradise," Sergeant Kolesnikov muttered beside him, his breath fogging the air. The other men in the unit chuckled darkly, their faces half hidden beneath fur-lined hoods. Volkov ignored them, his gaze fixed on the approaching outpost. Outpost 37 was a relic of the Soviet era, a cluster of crumbling concrete buildings huddled together like frostbitten sentinels. The landing pad was little more than a cleared patch of ice, cracked and uneven. As the helicopter touched down, the wind howled through the gaps in the walls, carrying with it the scent of rust and something else, something faintly metallic, like old blood. "Move out," Volkov barked, stepping onto the ice. His boots crunched through the thin crust of snow, and he suppressed a shiver. The cold here was different, deeper, hungrier. The men filed out behind him, grumbling as they hauled their gear. Private Lebedev, the youngest of the unit, nearly slipped on a patch of black ice. "Who the hell thought this place was a good idea?" he hissed, rubbing his elbow. "Someone who wanted us to disappear," Kolesnikov replied, his voice low. The base commander emerged from the largest building, a squat man with a face like weathered leather. Colonel Petrov's uniform was frayed at the edges, his gloves stained with grease. He saluted lazily. "Lieutenant Volkov. Finally decided to join us in hell?" Volkov returned the salute stiffly, reporting as ordered, "Sir." Petrov smirked. "Come inside. It's warmer than out here barely." The barracks were dim, lit by flickering fluorescent bulbs. The air smelled of damp wool and stale tobacco. The men dropped their packs, their breath still visible in the frigid air. Volkov ran a gloved hand along the wall. Something had caught his eye. Beneath the peeling paint, deep grooves marred the concrete. Not scratches, but deliberate carvings, jagged symbols, overlapping in chaotic patterns. Some looked almost like letters, but twisted wrong. "What is this?" Volkov asked, tracing one with his finger. Petrov shrugged. "Vandals. Drunk conscripts with too much time and too little sense." Volkov frowned. The marks didn't look like the work of bored soldiers. They looked old, and there was something about them, a pressure at the base of his skull, a whisper at the edge of hearing. Kolesnikov leaned in. "You see it too, don't you?" Before Volkov could answer, Petrov clapped his hands. "Oh, enough gawking. Get settled. You'll be here a while." As the colonel walked away, Volkov stared at the carvings. The wind outside rose to a wail, and for a moment the symbol seemed to pulse. Outpost 37 had secrets, and he intended to uncover them. The pre-dawn light was a dull smear across the horizon as Lieutenant Volkov tightened the straps of his snowshoes. The men of Outpost 37 stood in a loose formation, their breath curling in the frigid air. Frost clung to their beards, and their rifles gleamed dully under the weak glow of the barracks' exterior lights. "Standard perimeter sweep," Volkov announced, his voice sharp against the silence. 2 kilometers out, then loop back. Stay sharp, this isn't a training exercise." Private Sokolov, a wiry man with a permanent squint, adjusted his scope. "Sir, the last patrol reported nothing but snow and wolves. And yet, here we are," Sergeant Kolesnikov said, slapping Sokolov on the back hard enough to make him stumble. "Because the colonel loves us." The men chuckled, but the sound died quickly. The forest ahead was a monochrome labyrinth of black trunks and white drifts, the trees so dense they seemed to lean inward, watching. Volkov led the way, his boots sinking slightly into the fresh powder. The cold was relentless, gnawing at exposed skin, but the real enemy was the silence. No birds, no rustling underbrush, just the occasional groan of branches under their weight. Half an hour in, Sokolov raised a gloved hand. "Sir." He crouched, brushing snow from a half-buried shape. "Look." "Nook." Volkov knelt beside him. A skull, yellowed and cracked, stared up from the ice. It was human, the jawbone missing, the hollow sockets filled with packed snow. "Old," Kolesnikov muttered. "Probably some poor bastard from the gulags." Volkov pried it free, turning it in his hands. The bone was unnaturally cold, as if it had leached the heat from the earth itself. Then, a scream tore through the forest. The men froze. It wasn't human, not quite. Too high, too raw, like metal scraping bone. It echoed, bouncing between the trees until Volkov couldn't tell which direction it had come from. "Contact," Lebedev hissed, swinging his rifle wildly. "Hold your fire," Volkov barked. His pulse hammered in his throat as he scanned the trees. Nothing moved. The scream didn't come again. Petrov, who had lingered at the rear of the patrol, spat into the snow. "Wind. It's just the damn wind." Sokolov's hand shook. That wasn't wind. Volkov tightened his grip on the skull. The carvings on its surface, faint, almost worn away, matched the symbols in the barracks. Kolesnikov met his gaze. "We should go back." Petrov scoffed. "You scared, Sergeant?" "No," Kolesnikov said flatly. "I'm practical." Volkov tucked the skull into his pack. "We finished the sweep. But keep your eyes open." The men moved forward, their unease a living thing between them. The forest seemed darker now, the shadows stretching like fingers. And from somewhere deep in the trees, something watched. The supply room of Outpost 37 was little more than a glorified closet, cramped, dim, and smelling of mold and rusted metal. Lieutenant Volkov placed the skull carefully on a shelf between a crate of spare radio parts and a stack of mildewed blankets. It stared blankly at the wall, its hollow sockets gathering shadows. "Like it belongs there," Private Lebedev muttered, lingering in the doorway. His breath fogged in the chill. Volkov shot him a look. "It's just bone, old, forgotten. Like the rest of this place." Lebedev didn't answer, but his fingers twitched toward the rifle slung across his back. Sergeant Kolesnikov leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed. "You sure we shouldn't toss it back into the snow? Feels like bad luck." "Bad luck is stepping on a weak patch of ice and disappearing forever," Volkov replied. He adjusted the skull so it faced the wall. "This is just a relic. Malik." Kolesnikov's smirk didn't reach his eyes. "Tell that to whatever screamed at us out there." The three of them left the room, sealing the door behind them. The corridor outside was barely warmer, the concrete walls sweating condensation that froze into jagged teeth along the ceiling. Night fell like a shroud over Outpost 37. The wind picked up, howling through cracks in the barrack walls. But beneath the creak of old pipes and the occasional snore of a sleeping soldier, there was something else. A whisper. "Bedia." Private Lebedev jolted awake, his cot squeaking beneath him. His breath came in short, panicked bursts. The whisper slithered through the dark again, too soft to make out words, too deliberate to be the wind. "Come." He sat up, heart hammering. The barracks were still, the other men asleep in their cots. Only the dim glow of the emergency light near the door pushed back the darkness. "See me." The whisper wasn't coming from the room. It was coming from the hallway. Lebedev swallowed hard, then swung his legs over the edge of the cot. His boots crunched on frost as he crept toward the door. The whisper grew louder, threading through the air like smoke. Open. Shay. He peered into the corridor. Empty, but the whisper coiled around him, pulling him toward the supply room. The door was slightly ajar. He shouldn't go in. He knew he shouldn't, but his feet carried him forward anyway. The supply room was colder than the rest of the outpost, the air thick with the scent of old metal and something sour like wet earth. The skull sat where Volkov had left it, but now it faced the door. Lebedev's breath hitched. Closer. Make it. The whisper came from the skull. He was sure of it. He stumbled back, colliding with the shelves. A tin of nails clattered to the floor, the sound like gunfire in the silence. Lebedev? Volkov's voice cut through the dark. The lieutenant stood in the doorway, his face half lit by the dim hallway light. His hand hovered near his sidearm. The skull, Lebedev stammered. It was talking. Volkov's expression darkened. He stepped inside, scanning the room. The skull stared back, motionless. Silent. Me. Nothing, Volkov said after a long moment. You were dreaming. What? Lebedev shook his head. I heard it. Volkov exhaled, his breath a pale cloud. Then he froze. His gaze locked onto the shelf behind the skull. A handprint marred the frost there, too large to be Lebedev's, too human. The fingers were stretched too long, the palm too wide. And it was fresh. And Lebedev's hands trembled as he clutched his rifle. You see it too, don't you? His voice cracked. Volkov didn't answer. He stepped closer, studying the handprint. The frost had melted slightly beneath the fingers, as if whatever left it had been warm, too warm for this frozen hell. Kolesnikov appeared in the doorway, rubbing sleep from his eyes. What's the racket? His gaze flicked from Lebedev's ashen face to the shelf. Ah, so the skull does whisper. Shut up, Volkov snapped. He grabbed a tarp from a nearby crate and threw it over the skull. It's the cold. Plays tricks on the mind. Lebedev shook his head violently. It wasn't just whispers. It was words. Ancient ones like Old Church Slavonic, but wrong. Kolesnikov raised an eyebrow. You're a scholar now? Yeah. My grandmother used to chant in it. Lebedev shot back. Prayers. Warnings. Volkov's jaw tightened. He'd heard the whispers too, just faintly, when he first entered the room. A hiss of syllables that slithered into his ears and coiled there, heavy and cold, but admitting that would unravel the men further. Enough, he ordered. We lock it up. No one comes in here alone. Kolesnikov smirked. Afraid it'll sing you a lullaby, Lieutenant. Volkov ignored him. He gripped the skull through the tarp, the bone unnaturally smooth beneath the fabric. As he lifted it, the jaw shifted. A dry click. May. His breath caught. The skull's lower mandible had fallen open. Kolesnikov saw it too. His smirk vanished. Lebedev backed toward the door. I told you. Quiet. Volkov forced his voice steady. He wrapped the tarp tighter, but the skull's hollow socket seemed to stare up at him, mocking. Get a lockbox from the armory. Now. Kolesnikov hesitated, then nodded and vanished into the hall. Lebedev stayed rooted in place. We should burn it, he whispered. Volkov didn't disagree, but something stopped him, the same instinct that had made him pocket the skull in the forest. The carvings on its surface matched the ones in the barracks. Answers lurked in that bone. Kolesnikov returned with a rusted metal case, its hinges squealing as he opened it. Volkov dropped the skull inside. The moment the lid closed, the air in the room lightened, as if a held breath had finally been released. "Done," Kolesnikov said, slapping the case. "Let the ghosts chew on steel tonight." Volkov secured the latch. Not a word to the others. "The last thing we need is panic." Lebedev opened his mouth to protest, but a sound cut him off, a faint tap from inside the box. All three men froze. Another tap. Deliberate. Rhythmic. Like knuckles on a door. Kolesnikov paled. "That's not possible." Volkov shoved the case onto the highest shelf. "Move." They retreated into the corridor, sealing the supply room behind them. The wind howled through the outpost's cracks, but beneath it, Volkov could still hear it. The whisper. "Me." And this time, it laughed. The wind had teeth tonight. Private Lebedev pulled his scarf tighter around his face, his breath frosting the rifle's scope as he scanned the tree line. The outpost's floodlights carved a jagged halo in the darkness, but beyond their reach, the forest was a wall of black. His watch shift had barely begun, and already the cold gnawed through his gloves. He stamped his boots, trying to keep feeling in his toes. 2 more hours of silence and shadows before Kolesnikov would relieve him. A gust of wind howled through the pines, and for a moment, Lebedev swore he heard something else beneath it, a whisper, too deliberate to be the wind. His grip tightened on the rifle. "Watch. Men." The voice slithered into his ear, so close he flinched. He spun, rifle raised, but the yard behind him was empty. Just the skeletal remains of old supply crates and the hulking shadow of the radio tower. "Who's there?" he hissed. No answer. His pulse hammered in his throat. "It's the cold, just the cold." Me. Then movement. Iair. At the edge of the floodlights, something darted between the trees. Too fast to be a wolf. Too upright to be an animal. Lebedev's finger hovered over the trigger. "Halt," he barked, voice cracking. The figure didn't stop. It flickered between the pines, a shadow among shadows. Then another joined it. And another. His breath came in ragged gasps. "Not real, not real." "Dan." A branch snapped. "Meow." He fired. And the shot ripped through the silence, the muzzle flash blinding him for an instant. The recoil knocked him back a step, but he barely felt it. His ears rang, his vision swimming as he strained to see through the trees. Nothing moved. Boots pounded behind him. Volkov was first, pistol drawn, face sharp with alarm. "Contact?" Lebedev couldn't speak. He pointed at the tree line with a shaking hand. Kolesnikov and 2 others fanned out, rifles sweeping the darkness. The floodlights cast long, warped shadows as they advanced. "Clear." Kolesnikov called after a tense minute. Volkov didn't lower his weapon. "What did you see?" Lebedev swallowed. "Figures, running between the trees." "They'd yes." Kolesnikov snorted. "Figures or shadows." They moved like Lebedev's voice caught, like people. And Volkov exhaled sharply, his breath a white plume. "Search the perimeter." Full sweep. The men moved cautiously, their boots crunching through the snow. The wind had died, leaving an unnatural stillness in its wake. Even the trees seemed to hold their breath. Then Sokolov cursed. "Lieutenant." Volkov strode over, Lebedev trailing behind. Sokolov stood at the edge of the light, his rifle trained on a dark shape half buried in the snow. Not a shadow. Not an animal. A corpse. The body lay sprawled on its back, limbs stiff with frost. Its Soviet-era uniform was faded, the wool brittle with age. The skin was leathery, stretched tight over bone preserved by the cold but old. Decades old. And the head was gone. Lebedev gagged. The neck ended in a jagged stump, the flesh torn rather than cut. No blood. Just ice, gleaming like glass in the weak light. Kolesnikov nudged the body with his boot. Well, that's new. Volkov crouched, examining the uniform's insignia. 1960s. Maybe earlier. Sokolov's voice wavered. So it's been here since the outpost was active? No, Volkov stood. The snow's fresh, no tracks leading to or from it. The men exchanged glances. Lebedev's stomach twisted. It just appeared? Kolesnikov laughed, but it was a hollow sound. Guess the skull has friends. Volkov's jaw tightened. Burn it. No one argued. Dying. They dragged the corpse to a shallow pit near the generator, doused it in fuel, and set it alight. The flames roared to life, casting grotesque shadows against the outpost walls. The stench of burning wool and something sickly sweet filled the air. Lebedev turned away, but not before he saw it. In the firelight, the corpse's fingers twitched. He stumbled back, bile rising in his throat. When he looked again, the body was still, just another trick of the flames. Volkov's hand clamped onto his shoulder. Not a word, he murmured. Not unless you want a riot. Lebedev nodded numbly. As the fire burned, the wind rose again, carrying with it the faintest whisper. Soon. Meh. This time, he wasn't the only one who heard it. Kolesnikov's smirk was long gone. His fingers tightened around his rifle. And deep in the forest, something watched the flames. Lieutenant Volkov hunched over the outpost's sole surviving desk, the flickering lantern casting long, wavering shadows across the yellowed pages of an old field journal. The room, a repurposed storage closet, reeked of mildew and kerosene, but it was the only place he could work undisturbed. The journal had belonged to a geologist stationed at Outpost 37 in the 1960s. Its brittle pages filled with cramped Cyrillic notes and rough sketches of the surrounding terrain. Most entries were mundane weather patterns, equipment failures, but one section near the back had caught his eye. Local Evenki hunters refused to approach the western ridge. Speak of a cursed place where the earth is unquiet. Found carvings on exposed rock crude, but deliberate. Symbols matched no known tribal dialect. Workers unearthed bones during excavation for the radio tower. Command ordered them reburied without ceremony. Strange sounds reported at night. Men complain of nightmares. Volkov traced the words with a gloved finger. The geologist's handwriting grew progressively more erratic, the final entry a near illegible scrawl. They say the shamans marked this land, that something sleeps beneath it. The men are afraid. So am I. He exhaled slowly, his breath curling in the cold air. The journal confirmed what he'd suspected: the carvings in the barracks. The skull, the whispers, they weren't random. They were warnings. A sharp knock at the door startled him. Kolesnikov leaned against the frame, arms crossed. You planning to sleep tonight, Lieutenant? Or just commune with the ghosts? Volkov closed the journal. What do you know about the Evenki? Kolesnikov blinked. The reindeer herders, not much. Superstitious lot. Why? Volkov pushed the journal toward him. Kolesnikov skimmed the page, his smirk fading. Ah. He tossed the journal back onto the desk. So we're cursed. Lovely. Not cursed, Volkov corrected. Trespassing. He stood, grabbing his parka. I need to speak with Grigorenko. Kolesnikov snorted. Good luck. That old bastard still thinks radar static is a NATO psyop. Captain Grigorenko's office was the warmest room in the outpost, a fact that did nothing to soften the man's perpetually sour expression. He barely glanced up from his paperwork as Volkov entered. Lieutenant, unless you're here to tell me the supply plane finally arrived, I'm not interested. Volkov placed the open journal on the desk. Sir, I found something. The disturbances, the sounds, the carvings, they're tied to local folklore. This outpost was built on a shaman's burial ground. Grigorenko's pen stilled. Then he laughed, a sharp, barking sound. Volkov, I didn't take you for a superstitious fool. The Evenki, Dei, are primitive nomads who think the northern lights are dancing spirits. Grigorenko interrupted. He leaned back in his chair, the wood creaking. This is a military installation, not a campfire ghost story. Volkov kept his voice level. With respect, sir, the journal corroborates. Corroborates? Grigorenko's face darkened. Listen to yourself. You're chasing fairy tales while the men are on edge. That corpse last night was some poor wretch from the gulags, preserved by permafrost. Nothing more. Moi. Volkov's jaw tightened. And the whispers? The handprint in the frost. Frostbite and fatigue. Grigorenko stood, his bulk casting a shadow over the desk. You're relieved of patrol duty for the next 48 hours. Get some rest. And for God's sake, burn that damn skull before the men start seeing things. The dismissal was clear. Kolesnikov was waiting outside, smoking a crumpled cigarette. He took one look at Volkov's face and exhaled a plume of smoke. That well, huh? Volkov didn't answer. His gaze drifted to the western ridge, barely visible through the swirling snow. The journal had mentioned carvings there older, deeper than the ones in the barracks. Kolesnikov followed his stare. You're not actually thinking of. Sunset, Volkov said quietly. Meet me at the armory. Kolesnikov groaned. We're going to die out there. Volkov turned toward the barracks, the wind clawing at his back. We might die in here, too. The journal's final words echoed in his mind. They say the shamans marked this land. And now, so had he. The barracks were silent, except for the creak of rusted bed springs and the occasional shudder of the wind against the walls. Private Kozlov had just closed his eyes when the dream took him. It began with the cold, not the familiar bite of the Siberian winter, but something deeper, older. A chill that seeped into his bones, turning his breath to ice in his lungs. He stood in a forest of blackened pines, their branches twisted like grasping fingers. The snow beneath his boots was not white, but gray, as if stained by ash. Then he saw them. Figures emerged from the trees, their movements stiff, unnatural. They wore tattered Soviet uniforms, their faces sunken, their skin stretched tight over sharp cheekbones. Frost clung to their eyelashes and open mouths, their breath silent in the frozen air. Their eyes milky and unblinking locked onto Kozlov. One stepped forward, its boots crunching through the brittle snow, its lips peeled back in a grin, revealing blackened teeth. You are late, it whispered, its voice the crack of ice underfoot. Kozlov tried to scream, but his throat was frozen shut. The figures closed in, their skeletal fingers brushing his arms, his face. The last thing he saw was the glint of a rusted bayonet before it flashed toward his neck. He woke screaming. "Ache!" The barracks erupted into chaos as men jolted upright, hands fumbling for rifles and flashlights. Kozlov clawed at his throat, gasping, his skin slick with sweat despite the frigid air. "Easy, easy." Sergeant Kolesnikov barked, gripping Kozlov's shoulders. "You're safe. Breathe." Kozlov's chest heaved. His fingers trembled as they probed his neck. No wound, no blood. But the memory of the blade's kiss lingered, the phantom cold of it searing his flesh. "It cut me," he rasped. "The ghost it slit my throat." Private Lebedev, pale-faced in the dim light, exchanged a glance with Sokolov. "Ghost? Nost?" Kozlov nodded wildly. "Dead soldiers in the forest. They spoke to me." A murmur rippled through the men. Kolesnikov's grip tightened. It was a nightmare. Just a nightmare. But Kozlov's skin was unnaturally cold to the touch, as if he'd been lying in the snow for hours. Across the room, Lieutenant Volkov stood in the doorway, his expression unreadable. He'd heard the scream and the whispers that followed, not just from Kozlov, but from the others. The same dream had slithered into their minds, each variation a horror stitched from the same frozen cloth. Private Sokolov rubbed his arms, his breath uneven. "I saw them too. Walking corpses. They knew my name." Lebedev's voice was barely audible. "They called this place a tomb." A heavy silence settled over the room. Then, like a dam breaking, the men erupted. "We need to leave," Sokolov insisted. "Now." "Diao. This outpost is cursed," another added. Kolesnikov rounded on them. "Enough. You're soldiers, not children scared of the dark." But even his usual bravado was strained. His own dream still clung to him, the sensation of icy fingers dragging him beneath the snow, the sound of laughter in a language he didn't know. Volkov stepped forward. "Everyone, calm down. Will. Beal." The door burst open. Captain Grigorenko stood framed in the doorway, his face flushed with anger. "What the hell is this? A midnight tea party?" The men fell silent. Kozlov shrank back, his hands still pressed to his throat. Grigorenko's glare swept the room. "I've had enough of this hysteria. You are Red Army soldiers, not superstitious peasants." Sokolov stood abruptly. "With respect, sir, we demand transfer. Something is wrong here. The dreams." "Dreams?" Grigorenko scoffed. "You think command will reassign an entire unit because of bad dreams?" Kozlov found his voice. "They're not just dreams. They're real. Meal." Grigorenko's patience snapped. He grabbed Kozlov by the collar, yanking him close. "Listen to me, boy. The only thing haunting this outpost is your cowardice. Another word about ghosts, and I'll have you digging latrines until spring." Volkov intervened, stepping between them. "Captain, the men are exhausted. Let them rest. We'll discuss this in the morning." For a tense moment, Grigorenko held his glare. Then he released Kozlov with a shove. "Fine, but this ends now." He jabbed a finger at the assembled men. "No more talk of curses. No more midnight panic. You hear me?" "Deh." The men nodded mutely. Grigorenko stormed out, slamming the door behind him. The silence that followed was thicker than the cold. Kolesnikov exhaled. "Well, that went well." No one laughed. "What a..." Kozlov curled into his cot, his body still trembling. Volkov lingered by the door, watching the men. Their faces were drawn, their eyes hollow. The fear was etched too deep to be soothed by Grigorenko's bluster, because they all knew the truth. The dreams were just the beginning, and whatever lurked in the frozen dark was waking up. The static hissed through the radio room like a living thing crackling, spitting, a ceaseless white noise that made Lieutenant Volkov's teeth ache. He adjusted the dials again, his gloves making the fine movements clumsy, but the interference only worsened. Anything. Sergeant Kolesnikov leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed, his breath fogged in the frigid air. Volkov shook his head. Not even the emergency channel. The radio had failed an hour ago, cutting off mid-transmission from the regional command. One moment, the operator's voice had been clear, if distant, the next, swallowed by a surge of static so thick it seemed to pulse. Since then, nothing. Kolesnikov exhaled sharply. Could be the storm. Volkov glanced at the small, grime-streaked window. Snow swirled outside, but the wind had died down since morning. Not likely. Mend. He turned the dial once more, and for a split second, a voice broke through, garbled, distorted, but unmistakably human. Help us. Melt. Volkov stiffened. Did you hear that? Kolesnikov frowned. Hear what? The voice came again, fractured, as if speaking through broken glass. Inside the walls. Then it was gone, drowned once more by static. Volkov's fingers hovered over the dial. The voice had been wrong, not just distant, but stretched, the syllables too long, the pitch wavering unnaturally. Kolesnikov shifted. Probably just interference. Some idiot trucker on a scrambled frequency. Volkov didn't answer. He reached into his pocket and unfolded the brittle pages of the frozen soldier's journal he'd found that morning buried beneath a loose floorboard in the old commander's quarters. The entries were from 1942, the ink faded but legible. Radio silence for 3 days. Patrols report voices in the static. Captain insists it's German jamming, but the words are Russian. Old Russian. The men are refusing night watch. The final entry was a single line, the handwriting frantic. They're inside the walls. Kolesnikov peered over his shoulder. Where the hell did you get that? Doesn't matter. Volkov folded the journal back into his coat. We need to check the perimeter. Now. The wind had picked up again by the time they stepped outside, the snow stinging their faces like needles. The floodlights cast long, swaying shadows across the yard, the beams cutting through the swirling white. Private Sokolov and Lebedev stood guard near the eastern fence, their rifles slung but their postures tense. Sokolov's breath came in short clouds as he turned. Lieutenant, you hear it too? Volkov frowned. Hear what? Lebedev's eyes darted toward the tree line, the voices. And a gust of wind howled past, and for a moment, Volkov did hear it, whispers threading through the air, too many to count, too faint to decipher. Not from the forest. From the walls themselves. Kolesnikov swore under his breath. Okay, that's new. Do. Volkov approached the nearest barrack, pressing his palm against the frozen concrete. The surface was ice cold, but beneath it, a vibration. White, faint, rhythmic, like a heartbeat. Meat. He jerked his hand back. Sokolov's voice was barely audible over the wind. What do we do? Before Volkov could answer, the radio in his belt crackled to life. The static burst was deafening, a screech of noise that made them all flinch. Then, clear as a gunshot, a voice. You should not have come back. The transmission cut out. The silence that followed was heavier than the snow. Lebedev's hands shook. That wasn't the radio. Kolesnikov's jaw tightened. No, it wasn't. Volkov stared at the barracks, the floodlights painting the concrete a sickly yellow. The journal's words echoed in his mind. They're inside the walls. And now, so were they. The latrine trench was a frozen scar at the edge of the outpost, half buried under fresh snowfall. Private Lebedev kicked at a crust of ice, his breath fogging the air as he muttered curses under his breath. Could be worse, Sokolov said, leaning on his shovel. Could be summer. Then you'd really smell it. Lebedev didn't laugh. His fingers, numb inside his gloves, fumbled with the shovel handle. The wind had teeth today, biting through layers of wool and fleece. But it wasn't just the cold that made his skin prickle. Something was watching them. He glanced over his shoulder. The tree line loomed 30 meters away, the pines swaying like sentinels in the wind. Nothing moved. No shadows, no eyes. Still. Nye, you feel that? Lebedev whispered. Sokolov paused, following his gaze. Feel what? May. Lebedev swallowed. Like we're not alone. Sokolov snorted. We're not alone. Grigorenko's probably got his binoculars trained on us right now, making sure we don't slack. Lebedev shook his head. Not him. Something else. The wind howled, and for a moment the trees seemed to lean closer. Then, men. A sound. Nah, not the wind. Not the creak of branches. A whisper. No. Alone now. Mao. Lebedev's shovel clattered to the ice. You heard that? Dot. Sokolov frowned. Heard what? The whisper came again, slithering from the trees. Come see. Men. Lebedev backed away, his boots slipping on the ice. We need to go. Now. Sokolov opened his mouth, then froze. His eyes locked onto something behind Lebedev. Lebedev turned. The latrine trench was empty, just snow and frozen earth. But the whispering didn't stop. It was coming from beneath the ice. Sokolov stumbled back. What the? The ground moved. A crack split the snow, jagged and black, racing toward their feet. Lebedev barely had time to scream before the earth beneath him collapsed. And he was gone. Yeah. Lieutenant Volkov was in the mess hall when the shouting started. He barely had time to set down his tin mug before Kolesnikov burst in, his face ashen. Lebedev's missing. Volkov stood so fast his chair screeched. Where? Pay. Latrine duty. Sokolov says Kolesnikov swallowed. Says the ground swallowed him. The search party assembled in minutes, rifles slung, flashlights cutting through the swirling snow. Sokolov led them to the trench, his hands shaking as he pointed at the jagged hole in the ice. He was right there. Then, the ice just opened. Volkov crouched at the edge, shining his light into the fissure. The beam vanished into blackness. No bottom, no sound. Male. Lebedev. He shouted. Only the wind answered. Kolesnikov radioed back to the outpost for ropes, his voice tight. The men formed a loose perimeter, their rifles trained on the trees, the hole, each other. No one spoke. The wind carried the scent of something sour wet earth and old iron. When the ropes arrived, Volkov secured one around his waist. Lower me down. Yeah. Kolesnikov grabbed his arm. The hell you are, That ice could go again. Volkov shook him off. Then don't drop me. The descent was slow, the rope creaking under his weight. The fissure walls were sheer, slick with frozen mud. His flashlight beam trembled as he scanned the darkness. 10 meters down, the shaft widened into a cavern. His boots hit solid ground. Lebedev, he called, his voice echoing. Then he saw it. A shape in the shadows. Lebedev lay on his back, arms splayed, legs straight too straight. Arranged, his parka was gone, his torso bare. Frost coated his skin like a second layer, glistening in the flashlight beam. And his head. Yes. Volkov's breath caught. Lebedev's skull was missing. Not torn. Not crushed. Removed, the spine ended in a clean, jagged stump, the edges black with frozen blood. The ground around him was smooth, untouched. No footprints. No drag marks. As if he'd been placed there. Volkov's radio crackled. Kolesnikov's voice was strained. Lieutenant? You find him? Volkov couldn't speak. His light trembled over Lebedev's corpse, catching something else. Symbols. Yam. Carved into the ice around the body. The same jagged, twisting marks from the barracks. The same ones on the skull. A circle. A sacrifice. Den. A whisper so close it brushed his ear. He first. Volkov reeled back, drawing his sidearm. The cavern was empty. The voice hadn't come from the darkness. It had come from the walls. Pull me up, he barked into the radio. Now. Here's me. The men were silent as Volkov emerged, his face pale, his gloves stained with frost. Kolesnikov took one look at him and didn't ask. Grigorenko arrived minutes later, his parka half-buttoned, his breath reeking of vodka. Well, where's the damn fool? Volkov met his gaze. Dead. A murmur rippled through the men. Grigorenko's lip curled. How? Volkov hesitated. The truth would unravel them. But the lie tasted like ash. Wolves, he said flatly. Tore him apart before we could reach him. Kolesnikov's eyes flicked to him, questioning, but he didn't contradict. Grigorenko grunted. Stupid boy. Should have been more careful. He turned to the men. No one leaves the outpost alone. Double patrols. And silence about this, unless you want his family hearing he died shitting in a hole. The men nodded mutely. As Grigorenko stalked off, Kolesnikov leaned close. Wolves, Lieutenant? Volkov's voice was barely audible. Wolves don't carve symbols, Sergeant. Above them, the wind screamed through the pines. And from deep below, something laughed. The medical bay was little more than a glorified storage closet with a rusted cot and a flickering bulb. Volkov stood over Lebedev's body, now laid out beneath a stained sheet. The air smelled of antiseptic and something darker, the metallic tang of old blood. Kolesnikov leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed, his usual smirk absent. Grigorenko's already radioed command. Accidental death due to wildlife encounter. His voice dripped with disgust. Never even saw the body. Volkov didn't answer. He pulled back the sheet. Lebedev's torso was a map of frostbite, his skin mottled blue and gray. But it was the neck that held Volkov's attention, the ragged stump where his head should have been. The edges were too clean for an animal attack, the flesh torn in jagged, deliberate lines. And then there were the hands. Volkov lifted one, turning it palm up. The skin was unbroken, but beneath the surface, Something dark pulsed a stain, like ink spreading through veins. It formed a shape, a crude circle with jagged lines radiating outward. The same symbol carved into the ice around his body. Kolesnikov exhaled sharply. That's not frostbite. No, Volkov set the hand down. It's a mark. A shaman's mark, Kolesnikov muttered. Like the ones in the journal. Volkov covered the body. His gloves were damp with melted frost. Where's the skull? Where's the skull? Kolesnikov blinked. Locked in the supply room. Why? Mia. Volkov pushed past him. Because Lebedev's head is gone. And I'd bet my rank that thing knows why. The supply room door was ajar. Volkov froze, his hand hovering near his sidearm. He'd ordered it locked after the whispers started. The key kept on Kolesnikov's chain. Kolesnikov swore under his breath. I swear I locked it. Volkov pushed the door open with his boot. The room was pitch black, the air thick with the scent of mildew and something else wet earth, like the cavern beneath the ice. His flashlight beam cut through the dark, landing on the metal case where they'd stored the skull. The lid was open. The skull was gone. Kolesnikov's breath fogged in the frigid air. No way. That box was welded shut. Volkov stepped inside, his light sweeping the shelves. Nothing. Just empty crates and dust. Then, a whisper. And denned. You see now. Now. It came from the corner, where the shadows clung thickest. Volkov swung the light. The skull sat on the floor, facing them. Its jaw hung open, wider than possible, the bone stretched like melted wax. The hollow sockets were no longer empty, something moved inside them, black and liquid, pulsing in time with Volkov's own heartbeat. Kolesnikov stumbled back. Fuck that. The whisper came again, slithering from the skull's gaping maw. First of many. Volkov's finger tightened on the trigger of his sidearm. What are you? Dow. The skull's jaw creaked wider. Men. The voice that answered was no longer a whisper, it was layered. A chorus of voices speaking in unison, some young, some ancient, all warped beyond recognition. Keeper. Witness. Harbinger. The shadows in the room deepened, stretching toward the skull like tendrils. The temperature plummeted, frost spiderwebbing across the walls. Kolesnikov grabbed Volkov's arm. We need to go. Now. Now. The skull laughed, the sound like cracking ice. Run, little soldiers. But the dead are patient. Volkov didn't need to be told twice. He backed out of the room, his pistol trained on the skull until the door slammed shut behind them. Kolesnikov fumbled with the lock, his hands shaking. That thing, it talked. Actually talked. Volkov's pulse roared in his ears. We burn it. Tonight. Night. A crash echoed from inside the supply room, something heavy hitting the floor. Then silence. Kolesnikov's laugh was hollow. Sure. And how do you burn something that walks? Volkov stared at the door. The journal's words echoed in his mind. They say the shamans marked this land. And now, so had Lebedev. First of many. The wind howled through the outpost's corridors, carrying with it a new sound, a distant, rhythmic thumping, like fists pounding on frozen earth. Coming from beneath their feet. The mess hall was thick with the scent of burnt coffee and unwashed wool, the air humming with tension. Lieutenant Volkov stood at the head of the table, his gloved hands braced against the scarred wood. The men crowded around him, their faces gaunt under the flickering lights. Private Sokolov rocked on his heels, his fingers tapping in erratic rhythm against his rifle stock. "They're in the walls," he muttered. "I heard them last night laughing." His eyes darted to the corners of the room, as if expecting the concrete to split open. Sergeant Kolesnikov exhaled sharply, rubbing his temples. "Sokolov, shut up before I make you." "It's not just him." Private Kozlov cut in, his voice hoarse. He hadn't slept since the dream started. Dark circles bruised his hollowed-out eyes. "We all hear it. The whispers, the knocking." Volkov's jaw tightened. He'd heard it too, the rhythmic thud beneath the floorboards, the voices in the static. But admitting that wouldn't help. Not now. Captain Grigorenko slammed the door open, his bulk filling the frame. The men stiffened. "What the hell is this? A fucking seance?" Colonel Petrov followed, his expression unreadable. He leaned against the wall, arms crossed, watching. Volkov straightened. "Sir, the men have concerns." Grigorenko's laugh was a bark. "Concerns? Or cowardice?" He stalked forward, jabbing a finger at Sokolov. You're the one spreading this ghost shit." Sokolov flinched but didn't back down. "Lebedev didn't die from wolves, sir. Oh, what? And you know it. Mow it." The room went still. Grigorenko's face darkened. "Careful, boy." Petrov cleared his throat. Lieutenant Volkov's report was thorough. His gaze flicked to Volkov, a silent acknowledgement. "Perhaps we should consider relocating the unit until the storm passes." Grigorenko whirled on him. "Relocate? This is a military outpost, not a holiday camp. We stay until relieved." End of discussion. Kolesnikov scoffed. "And if we're all dead by then?" Grigorenko's hand went to his sidearm. "That's insubordination, Sergeant." Volkov stepped between them. "Enough." He turned to Grigorenko, keeping his voice low. "Sir, the men are exhausted. Fear makes mistakes. Let me take a squad to the nearest relay station just to re-establish contact. But if command orders us to stay, we stay. But at least we'll know." "Nerzishirk, For a long moment, Grigorenko studied him. Then he spat on the floor. "Fine. Take Kolesnikov and 2 others. But if you're not back by dawn, I'm sealing the gates. And I won't open them for ghosts." The men exchanged glances. Kozlov's fingers twitched toward his pack. Petrov pushed off the wall. "I'll accompany you, Lieutenant." Grigorenko's eyes narrowed. "The hell you will." Petrov didn't blink. "It's not a request, Captain." The silence that followed was brittle. Night fell like a guillotine. Volkov checked his gear by the dim glow of a kerosene lantern. The wind screamed through the cracks in the outpost walls, carrying with it the faintest whisper of laughter. Kolesnikov leaned in, his voice barely audible. Petrov's playing both sides. "Why?" Volkov adjusted his rifle sling. "Because he knows something we don't." A shadow moved at the edge of the yard. Private Kozlov stood at the tree line, his pack slung over one shoulder. He didn't look back as he stepped into the forest. Kolesnikov cursed. "He's deserting." Volkov didn't stop him. "Let him go." Kolesnikov stared at him. "You're not serious." Volkov met his gaze. "Would you stay?" The answer hung between them, unspoken. From deep within the outpost, something pounded against the walls. Thump. Nand. Thump. 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 Men. Kolesnikov exhaled. We're all dead, aren't we? Volkov slung his rifle. Not yet. Outside, the snow began to fall thick, silent, burying Kozlov's footprints before they'd even faded. And from the forest, something laughed back. The blizzard hit at midnight. One moment, the wind was a distant howl. The next, it was a living thing, slamming into Outpost 37 with enough force to rattle the barred windows. Snow lashed the walls like gunfire, and the temperature plummeted so fast the pipes groaned in protest. Lieutenant Volkov stood at the barracks window, watching the storm swallow the world. Beyond the glass, the floodlights were mere smudges in the whiteout, their beams swallowed after a few meters. Kolesnikov leaned against the wall beside him, chewing a stale ration biscuit. Well, we're not going anywhere tonight. Volkov didn't answer. His eyes were fixed on the tree line, or where it should have been. The forest had vanished behind the storm, but the feeling of being watched hadn't. Then, men, a sound. Not the wind, not the creak of the outpost settling. A bang. Metal on metal, sharp and deliberate, echoing through the vents. Kolesnikov stiffened. You heard that? Volkov was already moving. He grabbed his rifle and flashlight, barking orders to the men huddled in their cots. Sokolov, Lebedev checked the generator room. Now. Cool. Sokolov paled. But Lebedev's. Now. Now. The two privates scrambled up, rifles clutched like talismans. Kolesnikov fell in step beside Volkov as they moved into the corridor, the flickering overhead lights casting long, swaying shadows. The banging came again, closer this time, reverberating through the ductwork like something crawling inside the walls. Captain Grigorenko emerged from his office, his face flushed with vodka and irritation. What the hell is that noise? Volkov didn't slow. We're checking. Grigorenko grabbed his arm. Like hell you are. You'll freeze before you take 3 steps outside. Volkov wrenched free. Then we'll die standing. Better than waiting for whatever's in here with us. Grigorenko's jaw clenched, but before he could retort, a scream tore through the outpost, raw, guttural, cut off as suddenly as it began. The generator room. Volkov ran. My. The corridor narrowed as they descended into the lower levels, the air growing thicker with the stench of diesel and rust. The banging was louder here, a frenzied rhythm that set Volkov's teeth on edge. Sokolov and Lebedev, the replacement, a fresh-faced kid whose name Volkov hadn't bothered to learn, waited at the generator room door, rifles trembling in their hands. Whoa, light. Sokolov's voice was a whisper. It's locked from the inside. Volkov didn't hesitate. He kicked the door open. Cold hit them like a fist. The generator room was a tomb of frost, every surface glazed with ice. The machinery had seized, pistons frozen mid-cycle, wires brittle as glass. And in the center of it all, Private Kozlov. Or what was left of him. He hung from the ceiling pipes, his body rigid with frost, his arms outstretched, as if crucified. His parka was gone, his torso bare and mottled blue. But it was his face that made Sokolov retch. Kozlov's mouth had been sewn shut. Not with thread, with sinew, thick and yellowed, the knots crude and frayed. His eyes were open, frozen wide in terror, his pupils swallowed by the ice. Kolesnikov exhaled sharply. That's not possible. He left. We saw him go. Volkov stepped closer, his breath fogging in the unnatural cold. The ground beneath Kozlov was clean, no footprints, no drag marks, as if he'd been placed there. Then, A whisper, so close it brushed Volkov's ear. My second. Bend. He spun, rifle raised, but the room was empty. The others hadn't heard it. Their eyes were locked on Kozlov's corpse, their faces slack with horror. Grigorenko's voice cut through the silence. Burn it. Burn it. Volkov turned. What? The body. The room. All of it. Grigorenko's face was ashen, but his hand was steady on his sidearm. This ends now. Now. Kolesnikov shook his head. We can't burn the generator. We'll freeze to death. Chaff. Then we freeze. Grigorenko roared. Better that than this. He gestured wildly at Kozlov's corpse. Volkov stepped between them. We seal the room. No one comes down here. We wait out the storm, then evacuate at first light. Grigorenko's laugh was hollow. You still think we're leaving? Before Volkov could answer, the banging started again, louder now, frantic, coming from every vent, every pipe. And beneath it, something else. A chorus of whispers, rising, overlapping. So cold. Let us in. Men. We're hungry. Me. Sokolov bolted, shoving past the others, his boots slipping on the ice. The rest followed, sprinting for the stairs, for the light, for anything that wasn't this frozen tomb. Volkov was the last to leave. As he turned, his flashlight beam caught something on the wall behind Kozlov's body, a symbol carved into the ice. The same jagged circle from Lebedev's hands, the same mark from the skull. And beneath it, a single word scratched in frost. Third. Page. The door slammed shut behind him, the lock engaging with a click. Not from the outside. From within. Within. And as Volkov ran, the whispers followed. The storm raged around them like a living thing, the wind screaming through the pines, the snow so thick Volkov could barely see his own hands. He and Petrov moved in grim silence, their boots crunching through the deepening drifts. The outpost had vanished behind them, swallowed by the whiteout, but the colonel's compass held true west, toward the ridge where the journal had mentioned carvings. Petrov gripped Volkov's arm, shouting over the gale. There. Do you see it? Volkov squinted. Through the swirling snow, a dark shape loomed, a mound, too symmetrical to be natural, its sides steep and crowned with a ring of jagged stones. The burial mound. They staggered forward, the wind clawing at their parkas. As they neared, the snow thinned, as if repelled by the sight itself. The air here was still, heavy with the scent of damp earth and something older, copper and burnt bone. Volkov's breath caught. Nogate, Bolstand, Bodeldarin, Nenelais. The stones weren't just stones. They were skulls. Bay. Dozens of them, stacked in a perfect circle, their hollow sockets staring inward. Some were ancient, yellowed and cracked with time. Others were fresher, still streaked with frozen tissue. And in the center of the ring, Lebedev's skull. It sat atop a crude pedestal of ice, the jaw pried open in a silent scream, the same jagged symbol carved into its forehead. Petrov cursed, crossing himself. This is unholy. Volkov stepped closer, his pulse roaring in his ears. The ground beneath the skull was dark, not with shadow, but with something wet. Blood seeping up through the ice, as if the earth itself bled. Then the whispers began. Not from the wind, not from the trees, from the skulls. A chorus of voices, overlapping, warped, some speaking in tongues Volkov didn't recognize, others in broken Russian, their words slithering into his mind. You came. We remember. And join us. May. Petrov staggered back, drawing his sidearm. We need to go. Now. Volkov didn't move. His gaze was locked on Lebedev's skull on the black, viscous liquid now oozing from its sockets, dripping onto the ice. Where it touched, the frost recoiled, hissing like steam. Then the ground shook. A deep, resonant thud, as if something massive had stirred beneath them. The ice split with a sound like gunfire, cracks racing outward from the mound. Petrov shouted a warning too late. A hand erupted from the snow. Bone and sinew, wrapped in tattered Soviet cloth, its fingers ending in jagged claws. It seized Petrov's ankle, yanking him down with unnatural strength. He fired once, twice the shots echoing uselessly into the storm as he was dragged toward the fissure. Then Volkov lunged, grabbing Petrov's arm. The colonel's fingers were slick with frost, his grip slipping. Don't let go. Petrov's voice was raw with terror. Volkov strained, his boots sliding on the ice. More hands emerged now, skeletal and grasping, pulling Petrov deeper. His eyes met Volkov's, then resigned. Go, Petrov hissed. Warn the others. Then the ice gave way. Petrov vanished into the blackness, his scream cut short as the fissure snapped shut behind him. Silence. That. Volkov knelt, gasping, his hands numb from the cold. The whispers had stopped. The mound stood undisturbed, the skulls watching, waiting. Only one sound remained, a slow, rhythmic thumping, rising from beneath the ice. A heartbeat. May. And it was getting louder. The storm swallowed Volkov's ragged breaths as he staggered back toward outpost 37. His hands were numb inside his gloves, his parka crusted with ice. Petrov was gone, dragged beneath the earth by things that should not exist. The whispers had followed Volkov for the first 100 meters, slithering through the wind, but they had faded as he neared the outposts of perimeter. The floodlights were dim, their glow smeared by the blizzard. The gates stood half buried in snow, the watchtower empty, no sentries, no movement. Something was wrong. Volkov shouldered his rifle and pushed forward. The courtyard was eerily still, the wind muffled as if the storm itself hesitated to touch this place. The barracks door hung open, swaying on broken hinges. Inside, the air reeked of gunpowder and copper. Bodies littered the floor, some in pools of frozen blood, others slumped against the walls, their faces slack. Grigorenko's work. The captain stood at the far end of the room, his back to the door, his sidearm still smoking. His shoulders heaved with each breath. Kolesnikov crouched near the stove, his rifle trained on Grigorenko. His left arm hung limp, the sleeve dark with blood. The remaining soldiers, Sokolov and two others, huddled behind overturned tables, their eyes wide with shock. Volkov stepped inside. Grigorenko whirled, pistol raised. His pupils were pinpricks, his face streaked with sweat despite the cold. You. His voice was a broken thing. You led them here. Volkov kept his hands visible. Led who, Captain? Grigorenko's finger twitched against the trigger. The dead. The things in the walls. He gestured wildly at the corpses. They were infected. Talking in tongues. I had to purge them. Kolesnikov spat blood onto the floor. You murdered your own men. I saved us. Grigorenko's shout echoed off the walls. Then, quieter, they were already dead. You just couldn't see it. A scratching sound cut through the silence, faint at first, then louder, not from the wind. not from the storm, from inside the walls. Dead. Sokolov whimpered, pressing himself against the floor. They're coming back. Eat it. Grigorenko's pistol swung toward the sound. His breath came in short, panicked bursts. No, 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 no. Volkov moved. He lunged, knocking Grigorenko's arm aside as the captain fired. The shot went wide, punching into the ceiling. They crashed to the ground, grappling for the weapon. Grigorenko snarled, his nails digging into Volkov's throat. You're one of them, he hissed. You brought this curse. Volkov drove his knee into Grigorenko's ribs. The pistol skidded across the floor. Kolesnikov snatched it up, leveling it at Grigorenko's head. The scratching grew louder, closer, then. A whisper, not from the walls, from Grigorenko's mouth. His lips moved without sound, his eyes rolling back. The voice that emerged wasn't his. It was layered, ancient, the same chorus Volkov had heard at the mound. The curse demands a life. Grigorenko's body convulsed. His spine arched, his jaw unhinging with a wet crack. Black liquid seeped from his nostrils, his ears, his eyes. Kolesnikov fired. The shot tore through Grigorenko's skull, silencing the voice. His body slumped, the darkness pooling beneath him, steaming where it touched the frost. Silence. Day. Then the walls breathed. A sigh, long and shuddering, rippled through the outpost. The scratching stopped. The whispers faded. Volkov staggered to his feet, his pulse hammering. The remaining soldiers stared at him, their faces pale. Kolesnikov wiped his mouth. What the hell was that? Volkov exhaled. A trade. The journal's words echoed in his mind. The shamans marked this land. And now, so had Grigorenko. A life for a life. For now. Mass. Outside, the wind howled, but beneath it, something else stirred. Waiting. Watching. Watching. Hungry. Mentui. The power failed with a shudder. The overhead lights flickered once, twice, then died, plunging the barracks into darkness. Only the guttering flame of the stove cast any light, painting the walls in jagged, shifting shadows. Volkov's breath fogged in the sudden cold. Grigorenko's body. Where is it? Kolesnikov's silhouette stiffened. Still here. Why? Volkov didn't answer. His gaze was fixed on the far wall, where the shadows didn't match the flames' dance. They moved independently, stretching, coiling, creeping along the concrete like ink through water. Sokolov whimpered. They're inside. The words hung in the air, too real to deny. Kolesnikov racked his rifle. Then we burn it all. A scream tore through the outpost, raw, guttural, cut off with a wet crunch. The supply room. May. Volkov moved first, sprinting into the corridor, his boots slipping on frost-slick concrete. The darkness here was absolute, pressing against his eyes like a living thing. His flashlight beam cut through the black, revealing claw marks deep, frantic, gouged into the walls. Then he saw Sokolov. The private was pinned to the ceiling, his limbs splayed like a spider's legs, his back arched at an impossible angle. His mouth stretched wide in a silent scream, his eyes bulging as shadows poured into them, filling his veins with inky blackness. Volkov raised his rifle. Sokolov's head snapped toward him. His lips peeled back in a grin too wide for his face. Join us. Join us. The voice wasn't Sokolov's. It was layered, ancient, the same chorus from the mound. Volkov fired. The bullet punched through Sokolov's forehead, but the body didn't fall. It twitched, jerking like a marionette, then scuttled along the ceiling with a sound like cracking bone. Kolesnikov grabbed Volkov's arm. Run. They fled down the corridor. The thing that had been Sokolov skittering behind them, its laughter echoing off the walls. The remaining soldiers, 2 privates whose names Volkov couldn't recall, sprinted ahead, their panicked breaths fogging the air. One glanced back. A shadow surged from the vent, wrapping around his throat. He gagged, his feet lifting off the ground as the darkness dragged him into the ductwork, his scream cut short by the screech of bending metal. The last private didn't stop running. He hit the exit door at full speed, bursting into the storm, and vanished. Vanished. No scream. No sound at all. Just the wind, howling like a hungry thing. Kolesnikov slammed the door shut, his chest heaving. We're trapped. Mess. Volkov's mind raced. The shaman's mound. The skulls. The whispers. It all led back to one place: the tunnels beneath the outpost. The true resting place. He grabbed Kolesnikov's shoulder. The generator room. There's a fissure in the ice. Understanding dawned in Kolesnikov's eyes. You want to go down there? We collapse it, Volkov said. Bury whatever's waking up. A thud shook the door behind them once, twice, then a third time, each impact harder than the last. The metal groaned. Kolesnikov exhaled sharply. Grenades? Volkov nodded. All of them. The door buckled. Me. They ran. The generator room was a tomb of frost and shadows. The air bit at Volkov's lungs as he and Kolesnikov descended, their flashlights cutting through the unnatural dark. The fissure where Kozlov had been found gaped like a wound in the earth, its edges rimmed with jagged ice. Grigorenko's grenade, confiscated from a dead conscript weeks ago, felt like a lead weight in Volkov's pocket. He pulled the pin free with his teeth, the metallic click echoing in the silence. Kolesnikov unslung his rifle, backing toward the door. One shot. That's all we get. Volkov nodded. He crouched at the fissure's edge, the cold seeping through his gloves. Below, the darkness pulsed alive, waiting. A whisper slithered up from the abyss. Volkov. Ye. His name, spoken in Petrov's voice. Volkov's hand trembled. He forced himself to release the grenade spoon, counting silently. 1. The door upstairs exploded inward. Wood splintered, metal shrieked. Something heavy hit the floor, then scuttled toward the stairs. 2. Kolesnikov fired. The muzzle flash illuminated the corridor for a split second, just long enough to see Sokolov's corpse loping toward them on all fours, its limbs bent at impossible angles. 3. Knack. Volkov dropped the grenade. The explosion rocked the room, the blast wave hurling him backward. Ice shattered, the fissure splitting wider as the walls groaned. The floor buckled. Bye. Then collapsed. Chi. Volkov hit the ground hard, his vision swimming. The world tilted as he slid into the chasm, his fingers scrabbling for purchase on the slick ice. And Kolesnikov's hand clamped around his wrist, hauling him back. Move. Kolesnikov roared. They staggered toward the stairs as the room caved in behind them, the sound like 1,000 bones breaking. The fissure yawned wider, swallowing the generator, the pipes, the thing that had been Sokolov. Then Grigorenko stepped into the doorway. His head lolled at a sickening angle, the bullet wound in his temple weeping black fluid. His lips peeled back in a grin. "You missed one." "Nia." Kolesnikov didn't hesitate. He fired. The shot punched through Grigorenko's chest, but the corpse didn't fall. It lunged, its fingers closing around Kolesnikov's throat. Volkov tackled them both. They crashed through the weakened floor, tumbling into the abyss. The fall seemed to last forever. Then impact. Volkov gasped, his ribs screaming as he rolled onto his back. The cavern stretched endlessly around him, its walls lined with skulls, hundreds of them, their hollow sockets watching. And in the center, the mound. Petrov's body lay sprawled across it, his chest ripped open, his ribs splayed like wings. His head turned toward Volkov, his lips moving soundlessly. "Run. Meaty." Kolesnikov groaned nearby, struggling to his knees. Grigorenko's corpse lay motionless, its neck snapped. Then the whispers began. Not from the skulls, from the darkness itself. Volkov grabbed Kolesnikov, dragging him toward the only light, a narrow tunnel, its walls slick with ice. Behind them, the mound trembled. Something was climbing out. They ran. The tunnel twisted, branching, but Volkov followed the cold draft up, always up. The whispers pursued them, slithering over the ice, nipping at their heels. Then, a glimmer of gray light. The storm. They burst into the open air, the wind howling around them. The outpost was gone, swallowed by the collapsing earth. Kolesnikov collapsed, coughing blood. What now? Now. Volkov turned. The forest was silent. The storm had passed. But the whispers remained. Soft. Relentless. We remember. He helped Kolesnikov to his feet. We walk. And as they vanished into the taiga, the snow began to fall, burying the outpost, the dead, and the thing that still slept beneath. For now. Now. The cold was the first thing Volkov registered, gnawing, relentless, seeping into his bones like a parasite. Then came the pain. A symphony of agony radiating from his ribs, his legs, his face. He tried to open his eyes, but his lashes were frozen shut. A voice cut through the haze. Alive. Barely. Hands rolled him onto his back. Fabric scraped against his raw skin as someone wiped the ice from his face. Light stabbed his vision, blinding, painful. "Lieutenant Dmitry Volkov," another voice intoned. "Outpost 37. Volkov coughed, his throat burning. His lips cracked as he tried to speak. "K. Kolesnikov?" Quiet. A gloved hand pressed against his chest, holding him down. "You are in no condition to speak." The world swam in and out of focus. Snow. Boots. The distant thrum of helicopter blades. Rescue. Mescue. But the faces above him weren't soldiers. They wore the slate-gray uniforms of the KGB. The debriefing room was sterile, lit by a single flickering bulb. Volkov sat slumped in a metal chair, his bandaged hands trembling in his lap. The IV drip in his arm swayed slightly with each shudder of the building. Across the table, a man in a crisp suit studied him with the detached interest of a pathologist examining a corpse. His nameplate read Major Yashin. "You claim," Yashin said, flipping a page in his notebook, "that the outpost was compromised by supernatural forces." Volkov's jaw ached. "I claim nothing. I'm telling you what happened." Yashin's smile didn't reach his eyes. A gas leak, Lieutenant. That is the official report. An unfortunate accident resulting in structural collapse and multiple fatalities. Volkov leaned forward, ignoring the flare of pain in his ribs. You saw the bodies. The state of them. Frostbite. Animal scavenging. Yashin closed the notebook. The Siberian wilderness is unforgiving. Basin, you, of all people, should know that. Volkov's fingers curled into fists. And Kolesnikov. The others? Missing, presumed dead. Yashin stood, straightening his cuffs. You are the sole survivor, Lieutenant. A miracle, some might say. The word hung in the air, heavy with implication. Volkov exhaled slowly. What happens now? Yashin paused at the door. Now, you rest. And when you are well enough, you will be transferred to a facility better suited to your condition. A psychiatric ward. Volkov almost laughed. Of course. The perfect solution silenced the witness, bury the truth. Yashin's footsteps faded down the hall. Outside, the wind howled against the barred windows, carrying with it the faintest whisper. Remember. Member. Volkov closed his eyes. They could lock him away. They could erase the reports. But the dead would not be silenced. And deep beneath the snow, something stirred. 20 years later. The wind howled through the skeletal pines, carrying with it the scent of iron and frozen earth. Dmitry Volkov, once a lieutenant, now a ghost of a man huddled deeper into his threadbare coat, his breath curling in the frigid air. The village behind him was little more than a cluster of crumbling izbis, their windows dark, their chimneys smokeless. No one lived here anymore. No one sane. Volkov's boots crunched through the snow as he trudged toward the old radio shack at the edge of the settlement. The door hung crooked on its hinges, the wood warped by decades of frost. Inside, the air was thick with the stench of mildew and kerosene. He lit the lantern with trembling hands, the flame casting long, wavering shadows across the walls. The radio crackled to life before he even touched the dial. Static. Thick, pulsing, alive. Then. Volkov. D. His name, whispered in a voice that wasn't human. Volkov didn't flinch. He'd heard it for years now, ever since they dragged him from the wreckage of Outpost 37. The doctors called it psychosis. The KGB called it treason. He knew better. You're staying. The radio hissed, the static coalescing into something almost melodic. A voice, layered and warped, rose above the noise. They are coming back. Nah. Volkov's fingers hovered over the dial. Who? The static swelled, then parted like a curtain. A news bulletin, crisp and clear despite the age of the equipment. New military outpost established in the Siberian taiga. Designated Outpost 42, the facility will serve as a radar station and research hub. The transmission cut off with a screech of feedback. Volkov's blood turned to ice. Outpost 42. Too close to be coincidence. The lantern flickered, the shadows on the wall stretching, twisting, forming shapes he knew too well. Skulls. Symbols. A circle, jagged and hungry. The whispers rose around him, slithering from the corners of the room, from the cracks in the floor, from the snow outside. You remember. They will learn. The cycle begins. There. Volkov closed his eyes. Somewhere, in the heart of the taiga, fresh concrete was being poured over old bones. Fresh soldiers were unpacking their gear, laughing at the cold, unaware of what lay beneath their boots. and deep in the earth, something stirred. The lantern guttered out. In the darkness, the radio hissed one final word. Soon. Me. Outside, the snow began to fall, and the wind carried the sound of laughter.